On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors, the Toronto Raptors season is in the books, the playoffs have begun, and we begin the autopsy. Today, we take a look at the season as a whole, why it was a failure, how much of a failure was it, and also, what were we the most wrong about? There's a lot of stuff we were wrong about. We'll get into all of that today with Vivek Jacob of Raptors.com. As usual on a Monday, let's get to it. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1382, I think, of Locked On Raptors for Monday, April the 17th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've covered the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons on various platforms. You can find all of my work over on Twitter at WoodleySean. You can follow the show on Instagram, Locked On Raptors. You can also go and follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast for free on your favorite podcast apps and on YouTube. A huge thank you to the everyday listeners. If you are an everyday listener of the show, let us know in the comments. I would love to know who's tuning in to look at me every single day, just so I can know who's truly a sick puppy out there. I love you. Don't get it misconstrued. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com. Promo code Locked On. All right, let's get to it. It's Monday. We're back in the regular swing of things. Vivek Jacob is along. It's Big V Monday, and we are beginning to just pick apart all that went wrong over the course of this Toronto Raptors season. We're going to do player reviews. We'll start those tomorrow as we dig in player by player as to, who did well, what went wrong for them, what's their future with the team. But we'll start today with sort of a big picture view. Big V, welcome in, buddy. It's been a few days now. You're the first person I've had on the podcast to talk to, other than the YouTube commenters in the chat on Thursday night or Wednesday night, whenever the hell that game went down. And I'm excited to kind of dig into this with you. First off, sort of big takeaways from the end of the season. Obviously, we don't need to relitigate the game itself. It was awful. Big collapse. They really pooped the bed there, huh? But, you've been thinking about it now, surely like me, for a few days since it all. What's sort of top of mind now as you reflect upon what went wrong for the 2022-23 Toronto Raptors?
Yeah, I mean, a lot went wrong.
Don't come out with too hot a take here or anything like that.
But, if we want to get into, what... Are we getting into expectations coming in yet? Or
yeah, sure. If you want to do that, we can dive right on in. I was, if you have more sort of big picture thoughts as to how it all went down, that's cool too. But yeah, we can dive right into the expectations stuff.
I mean, so then based on the first question, I'll just quickly say that I actually haven't spent too much time thinking about what went wrong because I think it was pretty established in the first couple months what was wrong, and that just continued for the remainder of the season, except for actually getting a center, right? All the other issues kind of remained. And so I haven't spent too much time thinking about what went wrong. I've spent a lot more time about, kind of how the off season should play out and what are the things you have to consider. And I think from that, the biggest takeaway is the extent to which I personally have pretty much everything on the table is something I would not have envisioned coming into this season.
Yeah, that's fair, man. I think, we're a year removed, less than a year removed from Ben Golliver dropping a piece, I think it was the Washington Post, about how the Raptors are a sleeping giant in the Eastern Conference. Everyone was in on the Raptors. Take the over on the Raptors. The sort of flexibility they had with the good contracts they had on the roster, the obviously Scotty Barnes effect of it all, winning Rookie of the Year, being very high on people's minds as far as, future stars in the league, and that could still very much come to fruition. I think Scotty Barnes was better this season than he gets credit for, probably. We'll talk about that when we get to his player review later on in this week, but let's dig into the sort of the expectations versus what actually happened, right? I think, there were sort of a couple tiers of expectation. I think one was they take the big leap. They're really good right away. They go win 50-plus games. They're making the second round. They're really building upon and taking the logical next step from what last year was. I think the sort of in-between level of expectation was maybe they flirt with 50 wins. They flirted with it last year. There's no reason why they shouldn't flirt with it again. They didn't lose really any talent from last season. They brought in Otto Porter Jr. That worked great. Internal development, that type of stuff. This team can go win 50 games, but maybe they lose in a tough Eastern Conference in the first round or what have you, but the sort of over the season growth of the team is the thing that you pull away as the piece of success. Obviously, they fell well short of that. The Vision 6-9 thing, not happening. Doesn't work. You can't just have all the same guys on the floor unless they have the requisite skills for each position that have been established over 100 years of professional basketball. And the arrival of Jakob Poeltl was obviously the sort of counter to that. Let's start here. Is there any glimmer, any sort of kernel of success, quote unquote, that you can pull from the back part of the season after the Jakob Poeltl trade? The way the Raptors played with Yak, they were, I believe, 17th in offense, 6th in defense. They were 11th in net rating during that time. I think they went 17-12 or 18-12 after February the 1st. Like, there was a strong finish here. It wasn't the same closing kick they had last season where they just like steamrolled the league for 2 months. But as you sort of evaluate this season, obviously on the whole, it's a failure. Is there anything from the last couple of months that you would point to as actually like that is maybe a bit of a success point for this team?
I wouldn't necessarily call it a success point, but I would say that, I'm very okay with a team saying, hey, we're building anew, let's experiment, let's try something. And for them, it was this Vision 6-9. And I am glad that they reached its conclusion.
Yeah.
and said, okay, it's clear that they need a big body. They need help. And they went out and got Jakob Poeltl. I'm still skeptical of that being the most ideal fit at center as long as Siakam and Barnes are together on the team. But that acceptance is a step in the right direction. So I will say that is a positive.
Yeah. Yeah, look, it's obviously not going to be the easiest thing to iron out those three guys. I do think there are avenues to it. I think the avenue is just munching the paint and just being like an all-time great scoring at the rim team, which, hey, it's going to take a lot to get there. It's not something you're going to do overnight. I don't think they had enough runway down the stretch of the season to really massage that fit. I do think, however, the defensive uptick that we saw, it feels real. And I think, if anything, obviously this team needs some major surgery in the offseason, whether it's you're the person who thinks one of the core guys is where the surgery needs to be done, or the sort of back 2/3 of the roster is where the surgery needs doing. I think we can all agree something has to be done to this roster to better prepare it for the rigors of an 82-game season. And I do think, as much as there's probably a lot of push to see some of these guys moved out, there's a very real chance that they just bring back that starting five, which had really strong returns. They were one of the best lineups in the league after the trade deadline. I think there's a planet on which that lineup comes back next season and is the driving force of a successful year for the Raptors. It was not the driving force of a successful year this season, of course. As far as other things that, kind of compared to preseason expectation, was there something that you were particularly let down by? Obviously the whole team as a whole let everybody down in comparison to preseason expectation, but kind of narrowing in, was there one thing that really stood out as that's the thing that's the most disappointing failure of this season?
Yeah, unquestionably the defense. I mean, most people would have expected that the Raptors would be a top 5 defensive team coming into this season. When you looked at last season, and these were conversations that we had last year coming in, where I was like, you know what, this is a very new team. I don't expect them to be that good defensively because there's going to be a lot of growing pains. And we saw the growing pains through the first 3 months ish of last season. And then they figured it out. And then everything clicked. And so you would have expected that to, carry over into the start of this season. And it just absolutely did not. And so for them to be as disappointing as they were defensively, I think there's valid, criticisms to be made, or, debate points to be had about how much, the league just catching on to the defense factored in. But I also think just in terms of general execution, it was nowhere near the level of where it should have been.
Yeah, I think the flaw in the defense was very much put on display for all to see this year. You mentioned sort of catching the league off guard last year. That was certainly part of it, right? Like, how many teams were ready for, what the hell is this? Why are there 9 wings on the floor right now? Why is the whole court comprised of arms like some sort of body horror? It's awful. This year, they were more prepared for it, and specifically, the way they play is pretty easy to prepare for. If you have like a big heads up that it's coming, it's like, oh, they're going to send extra attention. Let's look to exploit the parts of the floor where they're not, right? And let's, work our magic and work in a flow of an offense where we can get the ball out of the hands of the guy who's seeing extra attention and have it flow from there. And, until Jakob arrived, there was no backline of defense to clean up all of the messes that inevitably seeped through. That, I think, is a really good one. It's just a small one, but I think it does kind of have a lot of trickle-down effects for me. Is just, I think Precious Achua's development kind of stunting was really damaging for this team. I think he would have been their best shot at having a real center in the first part of the season had he not gotten injured, which obviously you can't control. That sucked that he missed so much time. But, he wasn't great before he got hurt. He had a little stretch after he got back where he looked really strong. Jakob trade happens. It all throws him back out of whack again. The 3-point shot was not there all season. The offensive misadventures were still prominent with him. And I think I was banking on at least a reasonable facsimile of the player we saw after the February or after the calendar turned last year to January. And I think not getting anything close to that outside of a couple little flourishes here and there just had so many effects up and down the roster. The depth was compromised, the defensive viability, the offensive viability, like so many things hinged on Precious. I talked all last season about how he's the guy who can unlock Vision 6-9. Turns out he was also the guy that locked the box, threw away the key, and tossed the box into the bottom of the sea. We will come back on the other side. We're going to dig into some more stuff, things that we learned, things that we were also very wrong about. Here's where we get to say how wrong we were, and you get to point and laugh as though you, the listener and viewer, were also not hilariously wrong about a lot of stuff as well, because this is sports, baby, and only my opinions are right. We're going to come back on the other side, get into that. But first, gotta tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks, who have made daily fantasy sports super fun, super easy, super accessible, and what a better time to dive on in than the NBA playoffs, where there are games every night. You don't have your season-long fantasy team to worry about anymore. Hopefully you're not playing that game anymore, and you're just playing daily fantasy sports with Prize Picks to fill the fantasy void in your life. But during the postseason, this is the place to be, because all you gotta do is pick 2 to 6 players who are playing that night, and whether they'll go more or less than their Prize Picks projection in a certain stat category. If you get all 6 right, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you against the projections that are available. And maybe you don't want to just do NBA playoff ball. We get later in the playoffs. There's going to be fewer games on every night. That's okay. The NHL playoffs start tonight. You can get in on the hockey action. The WNBA season starts soon. That's there as well. You also got baseball all season long. And we know there are a bazillion baseball games for daily fantasy sports purposes. So go check them out. They have safe and fast withdrawals. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. And they're currently operational in over 30 states and Canada and every province but Ontario. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That means if you put in $100, Prize Picks is going to give you $100 to hang out with that original $100 in your account. What a great deal that is. Don't forget to download the app and enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100 with Prize Picks. All right, continuing on, your first listen of the day here. Shout out to the everydayers out there. Also, just a heads up, a week from today, you're going to want to be tuned into the YouTube channel as Ranking Every Raptor makes its glorious return after a 2-year hiatus. I'm not writing it anymore because guess what, Big V? Writing is hard. Doing podcasts and videos, a little easier. So we're going to go through and do the Ranking Every Raptor update. 269 Toronto Raptors players to rank, and I will be counting them all down over the course of the offseason on the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel. So go on and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single Lamarck Baker take. Guess what? I just gave it away. Lamarck Baker's first, baby. 2 minutes in the NBA in his entire career. 0 for 1 from the field. What a story. We're going to talk about that next week. What a tease. All right, Big V. things we were wrong about. Let's take a look back at some of the things we might have said about the Toronto Raptors at the start of the year that were hilariously wrong. I'll give you the floor. Is there something that comes to mind that you were especially wrong about in your prognostications for this 2022-23 team?
Yeah, I mean, I think besides the defense, I would probably have to go with thinking the 3-point shooting might improve. Obviously, part of that was Otto Porter Jr. being part of the rotation, and then you look at obviously Precious Achiuwa's disappointment, but no one was more disappointing in that regard than Fred VanVleet. Right, he is coming in the best 3-point shooter on the team when you factor in volume and everything. And I think you look at his shooting splits, the fact that he shot, just 34% before the All-Star break. Then after the All-Star break, even though, it felt like he was playing better, it was still only at 33%. And there were some good takeaways to be had from his pick and roll with the Jakob Poeltl. But for the most part, this was an underwhelming season for him. And I think that the 3-point shooting is something that is going to have to be heavily addressed. I don't know how much it can be addressed with all that needs to be done. I mean, Gary Trent Jr., that has been kind of a disappointment as well after the All-Star break, right? Especially. And so I think, his up and down play, all of that factored in. Like, as good as OG Anunoby was, it would have been nice to get more of a support from the other two guys. I mean, Gary finishes the season at 36.9% is fine, but I would say on the whole it was pretty underwhelming for him as well. So yeah, I probably, and it's not like I expected the Raptors to be like a top 10 3-point shooting team or anything, right?
No.
It was more like you could see the path to being out of this cellar and kind of getting into the top, I would say 15 to 18 range, somewhere there, I think was reasonable. And they were nowhere close.
That was the thing, man. It's like they only had to be average on a lot of the things offensively, because the way they play the possession game, the way they hammer the offensive glass, and the way their defense eventually kind of figured itself out down the stretch, like, they didn't have to be a barn-burning, incredible offensive team. It would be nice in an NBA where all the teams that are good are apparently incredible at offense, but I don't know if you could have predicted that massive sea change in the way the game is played over the course of just 1 year, going from, kind of a regular season into the most scoring forward season we've ever seen. Maybe that's something to address going forward if you're the Raptors. How do you get more scoring punch as the league tilts more that direction? But yeah, like the sort of the lack of like an outlier great season, I think, is also a pretty important thing here too with the 3-point shooting. Like, you didn't get Precious Achiuwa bouncing back with a 38% clip from deep. You didn't get Chris Boucher bouncing back to have his Tampa season where he shot 39% and was awesome, right? Like, you got a bit of a bounce back from Boucher, but not really a tangible one. A huge, massive drop off from Achiuwa. You didn't get like just someone popping with okay, this is a dude who's bomb threes for us, like Luke Kennard became for the Grizzlies after the deadline, and not getting those little pops of surprising against expectations positive play. That's a really big negative here as well. And I think that ties into sort of the bigger questions. Yeah, go ahead.
So Fred VanVleet took the most pull-up threes for the team. Was at 33%. Gary Trent Jr. took the second most pull-up threes for the team and was at 29.9%.
Yeah. It's not good enough. Like, you got to shoot pull-up threes. It's got to be a threat. I think this also maybe goes to a thing I was wrong about, which was, they can figure out the backup point guard spot between Scottie and Pascal. No, it turns out reliable guard play, much like reliable center play, two hallmarks of successful basketball for time in memoriam. Probably a good idea to have multiple guys who can play the point guard spot. Maybe that frees Fred VanVleet up to not have his bones crumble to dust over the course of an 82-game season playing 40 minutes a night. Maybe that makes his 3-point shooting that 1 or 2% more viable. And that's we'll get into that as well. I think I want to talk about the sort of roster building situation in a sec here, but I'm going to read from a blog post. I don't do that anymore, really. I kind of retired after 3 Substack posts this year. But Big V, in the spirit of just acknowledging things we were wrong about, I was like out of control during the first 2 weeks of the season. They had that 40-point win over the terrible Spurs, and I was like, yep, done. They're on their way. I had a podcast where I was like, could they be this year's version of the Grizzlies of last year? That didn't work out so hot. And I felt like we were kind of in the very early stages of something pretty special. Here is a passage from my piece where I wrote, it was entitled, "What if the Raptors are just really good?" Already hilarious. Let's dive in, shall we? Quote, "I picked the Raptors to win 51 games this year, which felt reasonable. They won 48 a year ago despite having their 5 best players together for only like a quarter of the games, and then didn't lose anyone of note. The additions of Otto Porter Jr.'s shooting and Christian Coloco's general largeness felt like decent half solutions to some of Toronto's bigger through-line issues, and the impending lead-wide tank-off felt good for a couple extra stat-patty wins late in the year. Not entirely untrue. Thank you, Indiana Pacers and Charlotte Hornets. Bold, considering the strength atop the conference, but reasonable. Through 8 games, I'm starting to entertain the unreasonable. With each game, I'm left wondering if we're currently in the moment we'll look back on in 10 years as quote-unquote the beginning. Not dissimilar to how Bucks fans might look back on Giannis's spindly early career phase that preceded him becoming the best player alive." End quote. Boy, oh boy, I was drinking the Kool-Aid in the first couple weeks of the season there, Big V. Off of that, do you still think there is, I've talked about this idea a little bit this year, the concept of, yes, this was a disappointing season, but there is a world in which the sort of leap that we all expected for a team that looked really bloody good a year ago from today, maybe it just comes in like a 1-year delay, and we see the team kind of do what we thought it would this year next season. Do you think that's still even on the table? Do you think the hope of this sort of group, I continue to think Scotty Barnes is the vehicle by which this team's ceiling gets raised, and I think you can build a really good supporting cast around him with the players you already have in-house. I do think there is a pathway to this team being pretty good with the current players and some tweaks at the back end of the roster or massive overhauls. There are degrees here, but is that dream just gone after this season? Like, do you think that's totally off the table of like a really sort of uproarious season where they kind of everything clicks and they become sort of like a darling of the league, like the Grizzlies were last season?
Yeah, first off, like growth isn't linear, so. I would say if they had 1 fewer games this season, that would not have necessarily been failure coming in. I think it's the manner in which things have played out that raises a lot of eyebrows and questions. And I think, in terms of the identity of this franchise and what it's been over the last decade or so, a big part of that was the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. I wrote about this recently for Raptors.com, and I think that's where this playing style, I don't think, lends to that. Because of the way the offense is structured, and it's just like, hey, every time down the floor, you're looking for that mismatch. Obviously, that's changed a bit with Jakob Poeltl in the mix, and there's been a bit more ball movement for sure. But I think on the whole, that style of play doesn't lend towards the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. And so I think you need to address that part of it first. And then you can get to, okay, yeah, there's a path forward to really level up next season. And so I'm not sure that that path exists without some type of adjustment to the roster.
Yeah, I think adjustment to the roster, I think probably an adjustment to just the general style of play, honestly. Like, it's so demanding the way they do it. They also invite a lot of variance with the way they play, and that can kind of impede your forward progress because you get hit by a barrage of corner threes by humps, and, it kind of feels worse than it is. I did not think we'd be sitting here at this time a year ago thinking, where the hell do they go from here? What does this team look like? Are like kind of counting down the days until the coach is announced that he's no longer the coach of the team, all of that stuff. Like it's speaking of expectations, like this is certainly not within the realm of what I thought this season was going to hold. Even if I think like you look at the grand scheme of the league, you look at the grand scheme of a lot of teams that are going through a lot of stuff and, have constant worries, even teams that are in the playoffs that have a lot of, toil and despair and roster drama and all of that. I don't think it's as bad as it feels right now, on the heels of an embarrassing play-in loss, sort of in the grand scheme of the league, but certainly thought things would feel a lot more sort of preordained and sort of what like the next steps would feel very obvious. It felt like they were going to be on a traditional track of young team forms into very good team, sort of progressively, like we see with a lot of teams over the years, and it just did not happen that way at all. We're going to come back on the other side, get into some stuff that we learned maybe about team building, about, the thoughts that from this season that are going to inform the way we think about the Raptors and basketball going forward. Big picture stuff, baby. We'll get to that in just one sec. Before we do that, however, got to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar. By now, Built Bar is the way to go. If you are like me, and like a late night snacker, I am really trying to curb this. It's such a bad habit. It's so bad for me. I'm constantly like a little goblin in my cupboards looking for food at 12:30 in the morning or at night, whatever the hell time it is. That's the thing. Like, it's not a time you should be eating. That's the point. And I still can't help it. So Built Bars have been a great way for me to wean off of the more disgusting treats that I throw down my gullet at 12:30. Instead, I can have something that's actually good for me, that's got protein, that feels like I'm cheating when I'm actually not. That is the beauty of Built Bar. They're healthy and they taste amazing. They are all covered in 100% real dark chocolate as well. Real chocolate, none of that fake stuff. It's real, it's delicious, and they come in great flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, my favorite, and cookies and cream, plus so many more under the sun. There's the flavor for everybody. Maybe you don't like the peanut butter brownie. Maybe you have a nut allergy. That's okay. They have allergy-friendly bars as well. They have their granola bars. They got their puffs. They have all of the different things you might want. Only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 17 grams of protein in your standard bar. That are some great macros, baby. You can also go right now to your local Walmart or Sam's Club if you're in the States, while you can still get your specialty flavors at Built.com. But you can get those classic flavors like peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream, chocolate coconut puff, all of that. Let's go check them out. At Sam's Club, at Walmart. Built Bar is the place to go. Also, Built.com if you want those more specialty flavors. Let's go. All right, we continue on here as I sweat out in this very hot room, V. Like, it got cold outside, and yet my apartment, it still has the latent heat from the weekend, and I'm melting. Let's run through this final segment, shall we? Things we learned about team building, about maybe things that we learned about the Raptors and their foibles or whatever. Was there anything from this year, Big V, that you kind of look at as that's the thing I'm going to take away as far as it's going to inform the way I think about basketball, team building, the Raptors franchise going forward?
I think probably reaffirmed the fact that you need, just different options on your roster.
Yeah.
And, Fred said it after the last offseason, right? Not even this one. Like last offseason, he was like, hey, Division 6-9 stuff should be viewed as a tool in the toolbox, not the entire toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's leaned in on, hey, we just need a new identity, right?
Yeah.
I think that part is clear. I think that if there's probably something bigger picture that I've learned with this franchise, it's that you can't kind of take winning for granted.
Yeah.
And over the last decade, if you exclude the Tampa season, the Raptors have averaged 51 wins a season.
Mm-hmm.
And especially coming off the second half of last season, we all were just like, hey, Masai
Raptors doing their Raptors thing. Yeah.
This is what they do, right? And it takes work. It takes serious work and commitment every single day. And there are consequences, like the stuff we praise them for, through their best years, where they were able to constantly sort of replenish the roster by dealing guys at opportune times and, just keeping that going, because let's face it, you're not, a buzz free agent location. And so when you constantly churn the roster over that way, you're able to maintain that success. But now you get the other side of it where Kawhi, Danny, Mark, Serge, all gone for nothing. It shows, right? And so there, at some point, you are going to have to bite the bullet on that. We were hoping as well that, Tampa would be the only bullet.
Yeah.
And now I think you've got to show that you can bounce back from this, right? So now, you've missed the playoffs 2 of the last 3 years, and you don't want to start that trend now, right? You want to get back on course, and this is a huge, colossal summer in ensuring that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to sort of add to your point, like, really was hammered home that the Raptors are not special this year, right? Like, to your point, made it feel like they were special, like they were some sort of like destiny to the Raptors in the franchise, like under Masai Ujiri's, tutelage, whatever you want to call it.
Masai just had to say we will win in Toronto, and you just win in Toronto.
And it just happens. And hey, it did happen. So of course I'm going to take him at face value when he says he's going to do it again. That man lived up to his promise. But, it's really hard to, there's luck involved all over the place in the NBA. I mean, we don't need to go down the rabbit hole of this hypothetical, but imagine the Raptors jump up to 3 in the 2021 draft and not 4, right? And Evan Mobley is their center, right? Things look different.
Yeah.
Maybe different, substantially so. There's so much randomness. There's so many different inflection points where your franchise can kind of veer off the rails. I think, honestly, dating even back to the Giannis pursuit, the very clear telegraphed Giannis pursuit, that was the franchise kind of going out of its own. This is the thing we do well, right? We do this well. It's we build and kind of create a good team over years and are always in the fight. And we turn that into Kawhi Leonard and won a title out of it. And then they tried to get sort of bigger than their britches and went outside of what they are, maybe because they thought they were special. And there's 30 teams in the NBA. No one's special. The Spurs were special for 20 years. That doesn't happen often. The Warriors are special because they have Steph Curry. You're not special in the NBA unless you have one of the 10 to 15 best players of all time on your roster at a given time, really. And I think kind of this was a good reminder of that this season was. To your point about different ways to play, I think this year, you couple what happened the last couple of seasons with injury, guys missing time. You also just factor in the way the league works now, where teams are using the regular season as a testing ground, as a way to sort of, massage things, not go full bore for 82 games necessarily, because the playoffs are what matters most. You're trying to, there's load management, all this stuff. You have to build your roster for 82 games, and the Raptors did not do that this year at all. They built this roster for 16 games, and they didn't even get to the 16-game dance. You have to have good players. If you just do the math, you just say average player now in today's NBA is going to play 70 games. And the Raptors had a few guys who played more than that, a few guys who played fewer than that, but 70 is about the average for their core guys. If you do that, and you just say, hey, all right, everyone's playing 70, that's 12 missed games for your, say, top 6 players on average. If you do the math on that, that's 84-man games worth of minutes. That's 4,032 minutes. You better hope those 4,032 minutes as a baseline are being played by competent basketball players. And to not have a viable backup center option just yet to Jakob Poeltl, to not have a real backup to Fred VanVleet, to only have 7 or 8 guys on the bench at any given time you can trust. Yes, part of it is they got unlucky with the Otto Porter injury and Thad Young kind of reaching the top of the hill and tumbling over it right as the season took place. I think they had higher designs for what their depth was going to look like, but they also banked a lot in the offseason on, internal growth is going to be what fills in our depth. And that was a bad bet. I think it was a justifiable bet at the time, but it was clearly a bad bet. And everything this offseason has to go into, how do we ensure we have good players to play in the minutes, or just not actively bad players to play in the minutes that are inevitably going to be lost to the rigors of an 82-game season. It's like in baseball now. You don't build a 25-man roster in baseball. You build a 40-man roster to get through 162 games. You have 1,000 bullpen arms you can lean on at any time, all of whom you would have some level of trust in, who have some level of pedigree. You just can't go into a season with 7 guys you trust. It's just not going to work. And the NBA, as it evolves more, I think it's only going to become more abundantly clear that roster spots 11 through 15 actually have some value, and maybe significant value to a team's overall odds. And with the top 6 being this sort of pretty difficult thing to punch into, right? Like, you have to be very good to be a top 6 team in the Eastern Conference right now. Maybe not very good, but at least pretty good. Obviously, the Nets are in there right now, but and I think there's a world in which the Raptors punch into there next year. But in order to get into that top 6, to avoid the play-in weirdness, to avoid your season being derailed by a 10-year-old's yelps, you have to build a roster that can withstand 82 games. And that, I think, is just sort of the thing I'm going to be thinking about a lot, is how do they fill in the back part? Is there any chance they do that, by the way? Like, what's your level of optimism that with their draft pick, the 13th overall pick? By the way, we're going to do our first tankathon sim at the end of the show here in just a second. 4.8% chance, baby. Let's go, Victor. Big V Mondays will be changed to Big Victor every days if Victor Wembanyama's a Toronto Raptors. Sorry, buddy. Yeah, like, what's your sort of outlook on the Raptors' ability to perform the surgery at the back part of their roster to give themselves a chance to hold up over the course of 6 months of rigorous regular season play?
Yeah, I don't think the odds are in their favor, just because they've really piled up the list of things. The to-do list is very large for the Raptors. And I think, obviously you got to see what happens with the free agents first, between Yak and Fred and Gary, and then you got to move from there. And so, you have to nail that pick. I think it's going to be an interesting debate for the front office, where do they look at it and say, hey, we potentially don't have a first round pick the following year. Do we take as big a swing as possible to get the best talent, or do we get someone that, really fits into the roster right now and can be a rotation piece, right? I think that's going to be an important debate, as it is always with any draft. And so, yeah, I think they're up against it. But if there's a front office, I would take my chances with when the odds are against them. I probably roll with Masai and Bobby. And, just to kind of sum up the conversation we've been having, it's that the Raptors' process of winning, I think we've just kind of had the glass shatter on it being foolproof, on it being losing proof, right? And drafting well, development internally for shooting, right? I think even that we took for granted a little bit with the way Norman Powell came along, with the way OG Anunoby came along, and beyond shooting as well. You look at the way the Raptors even developed like older players, right? Like Serge Ibaka was a great example of how he evolved since becoming a Raptor. And so that has also come a bit into question. And then finally, like, probably the biggest competitive advantage you would argue for the Raptors was the 905. And we have not seen a great sort of funnel the last few years.
Yeah, I'm going to have to dive into that sort of black box in the offseason with someone who's a little more plugged into the 905, because it does feel like there's been a very serious sort of decay of that pipeline. And I don't know if it's because they've drafted players who aren't NBA bound, or is there something wrong with the coaching that's going on with the 905? I don't want to cast aspersions on Eric Curry and his staff, or any other number of people who have coached down there the last couple of years. But it feels like ever since the pandemic that the sort of connection there has been dwindling. And also, I think other teams have realized, oh, we could use this as a competitive advantage. Like, the Raptors were first to it, and now everyone else is caught up, and so there's less of a very clear edge for them to carve out. They got to work around it, right? The last thing I think we can kind of also say is I learned this year, boy, oh boy, it was pretty awesome having Kyle Lowry on the Raptors for all those years, huh? He made everything a whole lot better and easier, but we don't need to linger on that one for too long. What we'll do now to close out the show, Big V, is one last Tankathon sim. Back to here. Back to this hell. The Raptors are 13th. My hope is that by the time we get to the draft in July or June, that the Raptors have won it at least one time on a daily tankathon sim here. So let's do it. Got it up here. The Raptors are the 13th best odds, 4.8% at top 4, 1% to get Wemby with the number 1 pick. Let's sim the lottery. Let's see. They didn't move up. All right, that's going to do it. Thanks so much for tuning in. Big V, anything you want to promote?
Usual stuff, Raptors.com. Masai Ujiri is expected to speak with the media at some point this week.
Yes.
And so I will be writing off that. And then we'll dig into the offseason. So you can check all of that out at Raptors.com. And besides that, you can see my usual tweets on Twitter at Vivek Jacob.
Everyone loves the tweets. Tweets, everyone, the favorite currency of all people these days. We're going to leave it.
If you want to get away from the Raptors, I'm here.
Yeah. There are lots of sports going on. There the sports at the wazoo right now. It's great. We're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please go support the show by subscribing for free wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. It's always very, very nice to get those subscriptions. Again, let us know if you're an everyday listener of the podcast, everydayers. Let us know in the comments. That's always very, very cool to see there. Monday we got Ranking Every Raptor coming back. Rest of the week we got player reviews, and we will talk about Masai Ujiri's availability whenever it does go down as its own episode. And thanks as always for tuning in. The off season is upon us, baby. It's going to be loaded. We got lots of good stuff planned and lined up, and I'm looking forward to taking us into the draft and free agency and a very, very pivotal, contentious, scary offseason for the team. We'll get into all of that as we get into the offseason proper. With that, we'll leave you there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.